This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Welcome to the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast, March 6th edition. I'm your host, Ben Jacob. This week, we have a returning guest joining us from way south in Indiana is Brad Burkhart. Brad, how are you this morning?
I'm doing excellent, Ben. Appreciate having me on today.
Yeah, Brad, I think to start with, if you could remind folks who may not have heard you the first time or have forgotten what your role with the company is and kind of what that entails.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. So my name is Brad Burkhart. I'm what they call a market development specialist for Corteva. Some people may think like that's maybe a tech rep in some other companies and things like that. I live down in Evansville, Indiana. I've been in this role for the past 2 years. Been with legacy companies, though. I'll be 16 years this summer. So I've been around the block for a little bit. My whole career been in crop protection and been in a lot of different states. Started in North Dakota, Southern Illinois, then moved back home in Evansville, Indiana. And that's where we still reside today. So glad to be here.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Brad. And as you folks might have imagined, given that biography there, we're here to talk about crop protection a little bit, and Brad's the man to do that. So, Brad, I think to start with, the start to March here has been ridiculously warm. It was almost 80 degrees on Monday this week. It's still well above average, even though we've cooled off a little bit today. We're getting a little bit of rain. You can see wheat fields that had an early shot of nitrogen are just exploding with growth. Cover crops are greening up, and we're starting to see some weeds green up in the field. So as we look at being this warm this early in the season, where we're still realistically for most of the southern half of the state a month out at least from planting, what are some things we should keep in mind from a crop protection standpoint as planting approaches with warm weather?
Well, there's a couple considerations I always think about. And I go back, we've had early springs before where we can get in the field early. But you mentioned kind of the green up we've seen. And, I've seen it in my yard. I've seen it in some fields. I've been out in some wheat fields. There's a lot of winter annuals that are looking pretty darn healthy right now. So I think some of the considerations that I think about when I think about like henbit, mare's tail, things like that, if somebody's wanting to do something early, maybe or get antsy and like, hey, I want to get out there, do an early burn down. That's maybe some of the considerations that I'd start to be thinking about if the weather's right. And when I say that though, so we need daytime temps above 55. That's a minimum. And then also you got to think about your nighttime temps. We got to have nighttime temps above 40 because a lot of the herbicides, typically we're going to use this time of year, be glyphosate, 2,4-D. Maybe using Elevore. Elevore's a really good option if you got some really hard to control mare's tail. Now you still got a 14-day plant back to soybeans. So I want to remind everybody of that, and then a 3-day plant back to beans. But if you are thinking about going to do some of those applications, pay attention to the weather. But it is really, it maybe potentially gives us a good opportunity because a lot of those winter annuals do rob some of those early season nutrients, especially in beans and corn, which is obviously what we do in the state of Indiana. And so that's something to think about. Along with that, though, we can't forget about, so what inevitably happens every time when we get an early spring is some folks may want to go out there and just do that early burn down and they forget to put in maybe the program approach layered residual. And so we got to be cognizant of that. We can't just do our burn down and then go plant our beans and not put on a residual. So what I like to have a lot of people do is if they can get out here in the next 2 weeks, potentially if the weather's right, to do that early burn down and then come close to planting as possible with that residual. And when I say residual, I'm talking products like Trivence, Sonic, something that's for soybeans here that has a PPO herbicide. So your group 14 herbicides, that's really going to do the best thing you can do to try to control those early season weeds as well as water hemp. So making sure you can do that either at planting or 7 to 10 days before with that residual. Now, the maybe the baggage with those group 14s is, and the reason I talk about planting the beans, once you plant those beans, you've only got basically 3 days according to the label to be able to put those on, because if those beans get up, those group 14s will basically injure and potentially kill those beans. So it's important to get that residual on and do that kind of program approach.
Yeah. So you mentioned several times in there the program approach, and in my mind, this is a long-term thing, right? The weed management, particularly with some of the breaks we've had, and mare's tail, water hemp being the most significant, I think, of that in this area. So last year, Brad, if folks remember, I'm sure we were really dry in June, and the corn crop both crops just seemed to not grow at all, but corn specifically was very slow to canopy in a lot of places. And, the residuals that you mentioned, I think we just got past there, but past where they were effective. We still had sunlight reaching the ground, but regardless, we had a lot of water hemp late in the season make it to seed last year. And
Yep.
I know this is going to be an ongoing process to fix it, but within that program approach, are there any special considerations in areas that we know we have that water hemp seed bed build up?
Well, it's a really good point, Ben. And there was quite a bit throughout the state last year, and the dry weather attributed, I think, a lot of to it. That created some of the challenges. Most of our residuals at that point and ran out. And we talk about that program approach, and when I say that, especially in the bean or corn acre, corn we like to put down residual and then come in, what I call Coke can tall high and kind of do a 2-shot split application, for your herbicide to try to extend that residual. What I think happened the last year is just, our second shot either A didn't get activated. So that was one of the challenges that we had, because you typically need a ½ inch of rainfall to activate most of those residuals. Or B, like you said, the crop didn't canopy, and those products don't last forever. So that was one of the challenges. Switching gears though, thinking about soybeans, I think last year, I'm just kind of reliving this a little bit. We went through that dry spell, and a lot of people, when we talk about that program approach in beans, we want the early burn down, put down the residual at planting, and then hopefully come in crop with that layered group 15 residual. So we sell a product called Everprex, which is esmetolachlor. Going into next year, we actually just got EPA registration for Inversa. That'll be our new encapsulated acetochlor that we'll have for 2025. We won't have it for this season. But using products like that layered group 15 are still key to try to manage those, because when you think about water hemp, most of the water hemp is not going to emerge until probably May. When you think about, the timing, it can emerge a little bit earlier, but that's the challenge with it. So that's why we need to make sure we're using that layered residual, because the best water hemp that you see is the one that you never do, right? And so I think last year where we had those instances where folks might have pulled out their Everprex, their Zidua, Metolachlor, Outlook, you name it, any group 15 on the market, I think people were saying, hey, I don't see rain in the forecast, I'm going to pull those products out. Well, the reality was, in a lot of pockets, though, we still caught a rain within 2 to 3 weeks after those applications. And so those products would have still worked. Because all those group 15s do is basically prevent those seeds from germinating. And they can lay out there a pretty long time. Now, we're not saying they can lay out there, 4 or 5 weeks, but you think products like Everprex or the new Inversa, it should be able to sit out there 3 to 4 weeks potentially and still get activated after that. Now, the challenge would be if you had some water hemp that emerged in between that, it wouldn't control it. But I'm trying to think what else. When I think about corn, we talked about beans a lot here, using the multiple modes of action. You talked about water hemp. One of the best tools I think we've got in corn right now, though, is going to be our Group 27 herbicides. So that's going to be products like Resicor or Cairo that have Cairo's our newest and latest and greatest in the corn market. It's a post-only corn product, but it's got tropamazone in it. So you may know that as Impact. It's going to do a really, really good job on water hemp. Now, we're not going to take down like giant water hemp, but it's going to do something really good on the post side. Other products to think about would be Resicor or Resicor XL. That's got mesotrione in it, so that's the other Group 27 that's going to do a really good job as far as controlling water hemp that is up. And then both those products, the Cairo and the Resicor, have acetochlor, encapsulated acetochlor or regular acetochlor in them. And that's your Group 15 that's going to give you that residual.
So we've cleaned up anything through March. It's greened up. We've got through planting. We've layered our residuals here. And we get into the growing season, and if we have some escapes, we're coming in with our post pass in the enlist system. Or any considerations around that? Like, what do we need to keep in mind once we get into planting and we're going in specifically and spraying our enlist beans?
Yeah, so Enlist, as you're well aware, we've had tremendous growth the last couple of years, and I think that's because the system works. We got the freedom to spray that product. We don't have a lot of maybe the baggage that comes with some of the other trait systems. And the fact that, Enlist 1 stays where it's supposed to be and gives us good efficacy and control. So in terms of, we don't have that really chance for volatility. We don't have, it's a neighbor-friendly herbicide, as I like to call it, and it stays where it goes. But along with that, though, you still got to be cognizant of what you're doing. If it is a super windy day, you got to follow the label parameters. But with Enlist, one of the greatest things that I love, it's a tool that we have that we can throw in with it. We always want to use AMS with Enlist. And so when I think about that, that really helps us get better weed control. Pretty much throughout the state, we've got hard water. So that really can help, using that AMS can really help that product work better. Other options, though, is we can take mixed Liberty with Enlist. So if you think about some of those really, really tough to control water hemp acres, the combination of Enlist plus Liberty plus your AMS, using the right nozzle, the right rate of water. So I'm talking probably 20 GPA of water, 3 pounds of AMS, and the right nozzle. You've got a recipe for really doing what you should do for efficacy on water hemp. So I think the fact that we have that option in the system truly is a standout with what we're able to do and offer at Corteva. The other things I think about, though, while I'm talking about Enlist, I want to reiterate it because it's a great herbicide, but we got to make sure we're using approved tank mix partners and things like that. But using that AMS, like I said, I'm going to harp on it again because last year, and I get called out every year to look at maybe some fields that maybe we have less than stellar performance. And 9 times out of 10, typically what I see is we didn't use AMS. And I say AMS, you could use an AMS replacement as long as you've got the correct load in there. So like you think about 2 to 3 pounds of AMS, that is okay. But then nozzles are key. We've got a lot of new sprayers that are popping up to the countryside. We've got See and Spray machines from John Deere. Look at our approved nozzle list, and it'll tell you what we like to see as far as efficacy and control to keep those driftable fines down, but still make sure that herbicide is getting to the target and getting good control. So nozzles, AMS, and then using the right rate of water. So minimum, we want 15 gallons of water in that treatment. And then, like I said, if you're using that Enlist and Liberty together, we're talking that 20 gallons of water or more.
Yep. So, Brad, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball maybe because as we were talking through the Enlist system, it just popped into my head. This will be the first year that Pioneer folks have gotten a look at the Power Corn Enlist system in corn. We have a few products that are in very small volumes this year that we'll be getting a look at. And I know that you've had some experience with that system going back for probably quite a few years at this point. But are there any considerations around it that folks? I mean, I guess the big one that guys would probably bring up is that if they know is that the Power Corn list trait brings FOP tolerance as well, and so you have the potential to have to change your management in soybeans the next year. But just I know this is a little bit off the script a little bit here, but what in your words the strengths of the Power Corn list system from a weed management perspective?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. So yeah, it's kind of a blast from the past. So I go all the way back to 2012-13 when we were kind of just Enlist was getting ready to come out, and we're thinking about Enlist corn and kind of what was the use case and the business case at that time, and then how could that help us, with agronomics and what our management practices were. And the same is true 10 years ago as it is today. Water hemp was kind of just getting started then, but like you talked earlier about those spots where we had a lot of water hemp in corn last year. And I think what better tool than to be able to go out there with Enlist 1, and you can take mixed Liberty with it, right? We're traded for that. What better tool could you use? We talked about a neighbor-friendly herbicide. We don't have those concerns for that volatility, right? And so the fact that it's got good efficacy on water hemp, and that's an option. That's a tool we can reach for in that toolbox. That's one more tool we can reach for to help us with our management practices on those corn acres is going to be huge. So, you mentioned about the FOP tolerance. So that may not be a big deal in Indiana yet, but you get farther down in Kentucky and down in Tennessee, it's a big deal for some of those tougher to control grasses that maybe glyphosate's not doing a really strong job on. So having that option in that PowerCore bag is going to be tremendous. And I think we'll actually probably reach for that tool a little bit more than you think here in the future. And I think it's just going to be a really good option for your customers and customers throughout the state of Indiana.
I agree with the statement on the grass control, Brad. And I may be the last generation that had to cut heads off a shatter cane at some point. I mean, and it would have been, it would have been mid 90s, late 90s when I was doing that. But I can guarantee you that if you have to go out and do that, you're going to be reaching for another chemical control option if you have shatter cane or even Johnson grass that's escaping. Those two in my youth were the devil, and they've not been a problem now for 20 some years because we've had good control of them. But if they come back, that's going to be a headache for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think it's good for me to still mention, though, just like we've done with Enlist soybeans, we still have to follow that program approach. We still got to use full rate residuals. We still have to be doing everything we can to use multiple modes of action. The Enlist PowerCore system for corn is not going to replace anything that you're currently basically doing today in corn. If anything, it's an additive or it's an option in that toolbox. So we're still going to need our foundation herbicides like Resicor or Full-Time or Keystone, and then we're hopefully doing that 2-pass program with the either Resicor again or Cairo in crop, and then you have that potential button if you need to push it. Let's say you get a big rainout event and you're talking 6, 8, 12 inch tall water hemp, which we would never want to spray that's off label. We always want to control water hemp when it's under 6, about 4 to 6 inches, right? Because you think about the amount of growing points you've got, but Mother Nature happens, and we get it, and that's the beauty of some of these systems and these tools. So having that option in there to pull that lever along with some of these other products is going to be really big for everybody.
Well, Brad, I think we might pivot a little bit at this point and go to the other subject that jumps to front of mind for me when we have an early spring is nitrogen management. It feels like May, honestly. It feels like June maybe in some places. And so, with soil temps getting warmer, being warmer than they normally are. If you think back to last year, in April we were cold throughout most of it. And so you could put out nitrogen pre-plant and your loss potential was pretty low. Right? I mean, we had a little bit of water moving, but not a ton of water, and soil temperatures are pretty low. And so we have, the polar opposite of that this year. It's warm, and it looks like we're going to get some pretty steady rains here, at least for the foreseeable future. And so, talk us through the tools to manage nitrogen loss and thoughts on that in a warm spring, potentially a warm, wet spring.
Yeah, no, great question. We were just talking, before this started today, we were pulling up soil maps just to see kind of where we were at, just because of how warm it's been here recently. And you look at like TPAC, Upper Purdue, we're above 60-degree soil temps already in northern Indiana, and down here in southern Indiana, we're approaching 63-degree soil temps. So when I think about nitrogen management, and I could take my Corteva shirt off here for the day and just give you a little of my history. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've seen this in action in the field for a lot of years, and so we sell Instinct, Next Gen, and Inserve for anhydrous ammonia. So Instinct's going to be for UAN, urea, and liquid manure potentially, right? Our biggest opportunity though for the state of Indiana is going to be Instinct Next Gen with UAN. There is a ton of UAN that still gets put out that is what I call unstabilized, unprotected nitrogen. We're a lot of folks. If they're doing anhydrous ammonia, we're going to use Inserve. And we've got a lot of support and backing. We've got a lot of data and history. So Inserve, nitropyrin, it'll be 48 years old this year, which it's hard to believe. It's been out that long, and that sometimes that's good and bad, right? It's the tried and true product, and I think anybody knows if they're in this space, we set the standard for underground nitrogen protection. So we talked about soil temps. If you think about putting on an application of either UAN or anhydrous right now, above 55 degrees, which we're above that now, those nitrous ammonious enzymes are starting to work pretty much immediately on that product, right? So, or on that nitrogen. So what is happening below the soil is you're converting ammonium to nitrate is what's happening. And so you think at temperatures above 75 to 80 degrees, once we get above 75 to 80, we're going to convert ammonium to nitrate in as little as 2 to 3 weeks potentially. So you talk about rainfall events. So what does that mean? I might get a little technical, but when you're thinking about nitrogen, you've got to keep it in that positive form as long as you can. So because most of our hybrids today are going to need nitrogen late in the season, pretty much across the gamut. So what we can do is using products like In-Serve and Instinct basically buys you time. It is the easiest way to think about it. So that keeps that nitrogen in that positive form longer. So it stays bonded to the soil where you can uptake it later when the corn plant actually needs it, right? So if you think about Instinct, we're going to use 24 ounces. If you're going just a full rate up front, if you haven't seen those, so last year we did some trials with Purdue, and we're going to continue to do more trials. People always want more data. They want local data. So we heard that as an industry. So Dr. Quinn last year did some trials with us. That they put out some. We get a lot of questions about split applying. Okay, so more and more growers are putting maybe 80 to 100 units down at planting, coming back with another 80 to 100 units or maybe 60 units, in crop. And so what Dr. Quinn did in some of those trials, and we've done it for years since Instinct's been launched, but we basically split the application. So we put 12 ounces, which would technically be a half rate. Now, we're not recommending half rates. We never recommend half rates herbicides. But when it comes to nitrogen, that rate of nitropyrin that you're putting in there is basically equivalent to like using a residual herbicide. And basically you're buying that window of time. So at full 24 ounce rate of Instinct, you're talking 6 to 8 weeks protection, versus if you're doing 12 ounces with that first shot, you're probably talking 4 to 5 weeks. And the same goes true with that side dress application, another 4 to 5 weeks. So, but if you look at Dr. Quinn's data in a couple of those trials, we were averaging anywhere from an 8 to 10 bushel advantage on doing that split shot application using 12 ounces on each shot. So we did 12 ounces with, I think, 100 units, and then 12 ounces with 80 units or 60 units, on the side dress. And that was really good data.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Brad, but that data, that study with Dan up at Purdue, was that in 2023?
It was last year, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's important to note that in 2023, a year with very little nitrogen loss potential, seemingly, that just improving the system a little bit or making the system more efficient was worth 8 to 10 bushels in a year with, like I said, almost no. In my mind, it seemed like almost no nitrogen loss. I mean, we had no rain in June. Where's it going to go? So yeah, right. That's very interesting call out.
And that's a good point. So like with In-Serve and Instinct, and they are so the products will work every time. So nitrogen management is complicated, and when I say complicated, the other thing that's happened here in the last few years is this space has gotten a little cloudy. If I can just take like maybe a little side road here, there's a lot of other manufacturers that are claiming to be nitrogen stabilizers, that are claiming to mimic in essence what we do, and some of their selling points are, well, we're easy on equipment or things like that. And the reality is when you are number one, you're going to get attacked, right? And so when I look at what we've been able to do with In-Serve and Instinct over the years, I think it's good to go back to the tried and true products. And we talk about maybe an easy on equipment. So Instinct, just so everybody knows, it is a water-based micro-encapsulated formulation. It can mix with, like I said, all kinds of different fertilizers. You can mix with ATS. Actually, the new formulation, you can even put ATS with it, and it'll mix up just fine. It's easy on equipment, being a water-based micro-encapsulated. Now, In-Serve, it can be a little bit harder on equipment, but there's a lot of things we can do to mitigate that risk. And, sometimes we recommend the last tank, potentially run it without In-Serve to clean out the system. We can spray things on valves. We also have, equipment support when we get into things like that to help out with that. So don't let that be a detriment to do the right thing on the acre for nitrogen protection, I guess is what I want to put a plug in, because unequivocally, we've got the best products on the market. And I think there's other people out there that are maybe claiming to be as good or better. And I can promise you, in all the data that I've seen the last years against some of these competitors, we win unequivocally almost every single time. Now, you think about a long-term effect. You talked about, is the year, are we conducive to nitrogen loss? Last year it was low, right? We were really efficient with nitrogen because it was dry. So we didn't maybe see as big a bang for the buck last year for In-Serve Instinct. But if you look at an 8 to 10 years, time period, I'll argue, especially in southern Indiana or Indiana in general, we typically always get warm, wet springs. And what does that mean? I talked earlier about converting that ammonium to nitrate. It can take sometimes as little as 2 weeks. You get a rainfall event, 1, 2, 3 inch rainfall event, you're moving nitrogen in a sandy soil almost a foot potentially out of that root zone where that crop can't get it. So that's the reason why we need to use these products. And I almost treat them as an insurance policy. I mean, nobody goes out there and buys a new pickup and drives it off the lot without having coverage. And you think about what you're spending on nitrogen every year. We're without protecting that investment, you're kind of leaving yourself at some risk. And farming, a lot of it is all about managing risk. And I think In-Serve Instinct is one of the best ways you can manage some of that risk on your acres.
Very well said, Brad. I agree wholeheartedly. And I like I mentioned to start off, it looks like at least throughout the immediate spring, but we're set up for a little bit higher loss potential than what we were in the past. And everything eventually returns to average. We've had 2 really dry Junes, and maybe a little bit short on seasonal precipitation for the past 2 years. That everything balances back out eventually, right? So we're due for a change in weather, and who knows, that may be this year. But well, Brad, anything else that you want to touch on before I let you go this morning?
Well, maybe 2 things. So, last couple of years we've been talking about supply. I think in the crop protection world, things have gotten a lot better. Things are, I want to say, back to normal basically, and more so, and then some. The channel is full of inventory, and growers should feel confident that, working with their local retailers, they should be able to get what they need. When I think about, we launched a new product last year. This will be the first year of sales season. If you're in an area where it has white mold, so we've got a new product called Viatude. It's a 2 mode of action. It is going to be the standard for white mold control. I think originally we were thinking we weren't going to have a lot of supply of that. Well, Corteva heard that and some of the signals from the market. So we went back and they produced basically almost a 6X basically forecast of what they originally produced. So if somebody is concerned about white mold this season, I encourage them to talk to the retailer about Viatude. And the last plug I want to put in, and you're going to probably laugh when I say this, but being in the crop protection world, we're tied with a lot of different things, but we've got a product, or we've got a system we call True Choice. And if you're buying a Corteva product today and not utilizing that True Choice, if you are just a base crop protection customer, you're going to get anywhere from a 5 to 10% discount, 5% for credit, 10% on cash. But if you're a Pioneer or a seed affiliate customer, you're basically can get maybe another potential 5% on your crop protection purchases if you meet those qualifications. So I encourage you to talk with your local Pioneer representative, talk to your local retailer. That option is still there yet for this season, and that's something to think about when we think about economics for this year and how you can maybe help your operation. So,
yep. No, that's a good call out, particularly in a year where margins appear to be a little bit tighter than what they have recently. So, well, thank you very much, Brad, for joining this morning. That's all great information. It's always good to have a check-in with you. I think we try to do it at least once a year, and we're very grateful to you for indulging us in this. So, thanks again, and thank all of you for listening to us each week. Again, I know it's warm this spring and it feels like an early start, but I just encourage everybody to stay patient, because I'm sure we do have another cool down here at some point coming. So stay patient, and you have the opportunity to get out and shake equipment down. That'd be a great way to spend your time. But thanks again for joining us, and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.